Imagine you're about to start that weekend woodworking project you've been talking about for months, and you realize your old shop compressor wheezes every time you try to power up the nail gun. You stare at the dust-covered machine, wondering if it's worth splurging on a new unit or if you should just keep making do and risk the tools dying mid-cut. That hesitation, whether the price is justified, whether the noise will drive the neighbors crazy, whether you'll actually need the extra tank capacity, feels familiar to anyone who's ever tried to upgrade their workshop. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I first saw the California Air Tools CAT 60040CAD, the headline ultra-quiet, oil-free, 60-gallon grabbed my attention, but I also knew the devil's in the details. I dug into forums, read through the handful of user comments on the listing, and compared a few competitor models that brag about horsepower or CFM numbers. What kept coming up was a consistent theme. People love the quiet operation, but sometimes get surprised by the size and the actual power output for certain heavy tasks. That gave me a solid baseline to test the compressor in a real-world setting rather than just trusting the marketing copy. Let's start with the noise level, because that's the first thing you'll notice. At 75 dBA, the CAT 60040CAD runs about as loud as a normal conversation. In my garage, where I have a 2-car lift and a small shop bench, the compressor barely registers over the sound of a standard drill. That's a big deal if you share a wall with a bedroom or if you're using the unit in a finished basement where constant hammering would be a nightmare. For anyone who's been forced to shut down a project because the compressor rattled the whole house, this quietness translates directly into being able to work longer without worrying about complaints. The oil-free dual-piston pump is another feature that shows up in almost every user comment, and it's not just a marketing buzzword. Because there's no oil to replenish, you skip the regular maintenance routine that many traditional compressors demand. In practice, that means I could run the machine for a week straight on my nail gun and air ratchet, then just wipe down the exterior and move on. For hobbyists who only fire up the compressor a few times a week, that saves both time and the occasional hassle of dealing with oily messes on tools. Now, the 60-gallon steel tank is where the value proposition really starts to show. A larger tank stores more compressed air, so you get longer intervals between the motor kicking back on. In my test, I ran an inch pneumatic sander on a full-size piece of hardwood for about 25 minutes before the motor revived. That continuous airflow is a comfort when you're sanding, because you don't have to constantly watch the pressure gauge and worry about the motor cycling on and off, which can cause uneven finish. For someone who does medium-scale projects, think cabinet building, small framing, or automotive repairs, the extended runtime can be the difference between a smooth workflow and a stop-and-go frustration. The twin-motor design adds a layer of reliability that you don't see on single-motor units in this price range. If one motor were to fail, the other can still provide enough power for lighter tasks, keeping the compressor from being a total loss. I didn't have to push the unit to its limits, but the fact that 2 motors share the load means less strain on each individual motor, which should translate to a longer overall lifespan. For a small contractor who needs a workhorse that won't quit mid-job, that redundancy is reassuring. However, there are practical trade-offs that make the CAT 60040CAD less universal than its specs might suggest. First, the 4 HP rating is modest when you compare it to larger shop compressors that boast 6 HP or more. If you're planning on doing serious metalworking, sandblasting, or running multiple tools at once, say a spray gun, a grinder, and a ratchet simultaneously, you might find the airflow insufficient. The unit's CFM at 90 psi hovers around 2.2 CFM, which is plenty for nail guns, air wrenches, and small sanders, but you'll start to see pressure drop if you try to power a large spray system. In short, the compressor shines when the demand is steady and moderate, but it's not built for high-volume, multi-tool operations. Size and weight are the next hidden costs. The steel tank, while durable,